Okay, so I think it's time that we continue. Now with our main lecture for today. Our lecturer is Massimo de Angelis. He's a political economist in the autonomist Marxist tradition. He's a professor at the School of Law and Social Sciences at the University of East London. He's also the founder and editor of the web journal The Commoner, which has until now released 15 issues devoted to topics such as, the last one is care work, domestic labor and social reproduction. Earlier issues have dealt with the politics of free software, the energy crisis, migration and many other issues. All of these issues are treated in relation to the central issues of the journal, which are the commons, enclosures, primitive accumulation and its relevance for understanding contemporary capitalism. On all of these central issues, de Angelis himself has written numerous articles. And as can be expected from someone belonging to the autonomist Marxist tradition, his work puts a strong emphasis on practices of self-organization and forms of subjectivity developing outside of and against the logic of reproduction inherent in the capital relation. The probably most systematic elaboration of these themes can be found in his book, The Beginning of History, published by Pluto Press in 2007. And against the triumphalist claim of the apologists of neoliberalism, who in crude pseudo-Hegelian fashion saw the decline of the Soviet system as the final end of history, de Angelis claims that history has yet to start in any meaningful sense, echoing thereby Marx's own claim that hitherto all history is merely prehistory. The seeds of the beginning of true history lie at the diverse points that transcend the confines of the capital relation and the firm practices out of which a new society may emerge. A society, a truly autonomous society in the sense of a generalized self-management and self-governance, delegating the invasive heteronomy of the profit motive to the dustbin of prehistory in which it belongs. So, this would be my introduction. Thank you for listening, and now Massimo de Angelis.
Thank you, and especially thanks to the collective work of the four associations that brought me here. Thank you very much. Today's topic is written there, Cries of Capitalist Relations and the Need for Plan C. You may already guess what is Plan C. In fact, it's just a part of the actual plan. The actual plan is Plan C and D, because commons are also in known very horizontal and democratic organizations. So Plan C and D is Plan, Commons and democracy from below. I would like to, my talk would be really using very large brushes. I definitely don't want to go into the details, and maybe can be explored later in the discussions. But I would like to have used these large brushes to talk about the current crisis, and then going back in history, seeing the roots of the common crisis and see how the commons somehow are linked to this and how they can really constitute the alternative. But there is a key word that I would like to be the subtext of all my talk, which is problematization, in the sense that nobody has the answers to actually move forward, and we need to do the problematization together of how to get forward. The first slide is a very boring yet indicative slide. Boring in the sense that in one picture brings together a variety of analytics, someone outdated, but not that outdated in terms of the significance. We have, it's kind of a summary, quantitative summary of what is going on today. On the top left corner, you have the increasing of the food crisis. It's just an indication of how the current crisis is hitting hard the poorest part of the world population, of the commoners around the world. The more they've been pushed into depending on the food market, and especially the food global market, the more they've been not only dispossessed of their own local conditions of food production, their own food sovereignty, but they're now hit hard by the increase of the food prices, which in fact is very much linked to, among other things, to the shift in the speculation from assets to housing into actual food and other hard resources. On the bottom right corner is just one picture. It was quite famous, became quite famous in the mid-90s from a UN report of the so-called chalice of world wealth, where the very small bit of the population up has the largest percentage of wealth. Today we would say the 1% portion is up there, and the 99% is just the handle of the chalice in terms of wealth, and shows again one of the major issues that has been in fact worsened with the last 30 years of neoliberalism. And then the picture in the center at the bottom, it's just an indication of the gravity of the current crisis in terms of labor. The deeper curve show simply how many months it took after the employment peak, and this is compared to various other recessions since the 70s. So the expected growth that all our, not just the ruling elites, but also many organizations of the working class around the world is expecting, is actually lacking, is not coming, is not offering any breathing space to, in fact, the many people who actually depend heavily on a wage. And two other pictures, the top right and bottom left, are two pictures reminding us the different dimensions of crisis, which also is crucial and is going to be worse and worse, which is the climate change. The bottom left is the growth of the temperature due to climate change, and the top right is the intensification of cyclones and other so-called natural phenomena, which are now more and more people and scientists are linking to climate change. Now, if you think that climate change is, and a few people, actually several people, also in the movement, thought that only a few years ago, that climate change is something of such a universal impact that even the ruling elites, ruling classes will go to our rescue, forget it, because one of the main opportunities that climate change offers to business is, in fact, for example, in the engineering and building industries. I picked up a few years ago a trade journal into the tube in the underground in London, precisely saying good news on the front of climate change, more engineering job, more investment in engineering to build barriers, etc., especially for the global north. Many people, and with, in a sense, a good perception, have called the present conditions resulting from the crisis, and not just the crisis, but in fact the neoliberal era, like the condition of precarity, okay? A precarity that many, though, especially in the Italian post-workerist tradition, interpret in a often in a very narrow sense in terms of precarity of labor, which is absolutely true in Italy itself. In the last 20 years, labor rights have been eroded to the point that people are now in and out of job, like pretty much that swing over there with unstable labor, unstable wage, and unsure conditions of social security. But of course, the precarity is actually quite more generalized to, and again, if we moved out from as a country like Italy or a continent like Europe, or an area like the global north, like the West, we actually see the precarity has assumed the value of in fact, generalized conditions. We have environmental precarity, where people struggle every day to deal with the externalities with capital in order to access water, in order to access land, in order to polluted by export industries, where struggles are occurring to a variety of sense, including struggles against enclosures, like those women in the Narmada Valley that refuse to leave a village. Precarity is a condition of capitalism, in fact. In fact, it's not simply a modern condition, is not simply involving labor, but assume a variety of senses. Is labor, is existential, is in terms of social security and in terms of environment. This is the condition in which, in fact, is intensifying with the current crisis. Is conditions that bring a lot of people in growing isolation or in movement that still, though, as someone mentioned in a previous panel, seems to have difficulty in making inroad into so-called, quote, civil society. So we have to, I think, enlarge and deepen our understanding of precarity, of this situation of difficult living, in terms of the current crisis as a crisis of social reproduction. The reproduction of our bodies, our lives, and our communities, however we want to define them. The conditions of reproduction, which means both the conditions of reproducing life, okay, and labor power, because a lot, due to our large dependency on the wage, much of reproduction life is also means and passes through how are we able to sell our labor power, to what cost, to what conditions, to what type of reproduction labor do we have to go through in order to sell our labor power. And this crisis of reproduction is intensifying every single day with the existence of the crisis. And just to have a look around and pick your area, from Greece to the suburbs in the United States, or the inner cities of the United States, to workers' communities in South Africa, to China. You know, you could really list the reason the crisis is always somehow, in different contexts, the result of dispossessions, active dispossessions. See now the big, large wave of land grabs affecting many people in the South, land grab, it actually is also linked to this crisis in terms of, again, land for speculations, again, capital shifting away from assets that were, paper assets into actual real assets, and the fact that it is linked to the fact that there is also a design, for example, in areas like Africa, that maybe can be the new areas of cheaper labor in the international scale, in international wage hierarchy, something that may open up the new wave of growth for capital. Externalities, which is simply a way to reduce cost for capital. Drive to reduce the social wage, the entitlements, the ways that people reproduce their own livelihood. And the ongoing recreation of social hierarchy at the national and international level, which in fact divides this social body that we might call in the old language the proletariats, but we actually may identify as the world of the commoners, divides them and make it difficult, increasingly always difficult to bring together and create alternative. So capitalism is crisis, as this banner says at the Occupy of the Occupy movement in London, but it's especially crisis of the conditions of social reproduction. And this is essentially, and that's my overall subtext here, if capital is crisis of the conditions of social reproduction, that is perhaps the very aim of a commons movement, reclaiming the conditions for social reproduction. Now, it is important, I mean, part of this talk was in fact trying to draw a history, short and as sharp as possible, of capitalist crisis in relation to struggles. In relation to struggles, because we are, I mean, we don't believe, I don't believe in the possibility, of struggle as struggle, only as struggle. I think struggles are a necessary moment in the in social change, in a change for a better world, a journey of emancipation, okay, obviously is necessary. But struggle understood as movement is, although necessary, is not sufficient to change the world. And if you look at the history of the struggles as linked to the changes in regimes, in paradigms, that capital, this major social force that we are facing in order to change the world, has adopted. And in fact, if one looks at these three main phases, you could really understand the passage from one phase to another as a bringing together, reconsolidating the power of elites, enlightened by the conditions that they face vis-à-vis the struggle, and finding always new ways forward to divide the commoners and reenact new conditions of accumulations. And this is also another issue that we need to problematize. That is the fact that struggle alone, as such, as struggle understood as social movement, although necessity is not sufficient. Let's start from our current crisis, a crisis of neoliberalism, which is the past, the major paradigms that has accompanied us since the 1980s. neoliberalism was itself a strategy, a plan, as I call it in later on, that consolidated the ruling elites in order to face the struggles and the constraints that these struggles has put on the previous regime and the previous plan, Keynesianism. Now, neoliberalism starts, if one want to put a date in which this strategy really changed, in October 1979. It's difficult journey to locate one date, but October 1979 is when neoliberalism, in a sense, went public. There were a few anticipations before, like the crisis in New York City, that essentially provide the breakdown of the bankruptcy of the New York City Council, with the cut in a lot of services. But the actual global decision to go and to create the context for establishing this neoliberal crisis was October 1979, when Paul Volcker, the chairman of the Federal Reserve, increases the interest rate by 1%. It's 4 points. 1%, which precipitated the entire world into a massive global recession. Now, these global recessions, of course, has an effect in the conditions of reproduction of people, in livelihood reproduction of people. And of course, things have changed, have taken different courses in different places. But what actually happened was, for example, in the industrialized countries in the north, there has been a wave of deindustrialization, thus weakening any labor movement. It was, in fact, building up the strength throughout the 60s and 70s. And massive cuts in the welfare state. You might have talked about this yesterday, I see, in the program. Unfortunately, it was not here. Massive cuts in the welfare state have begun. Cuts that are still now being implemented, and we are really at the bone, so to say, in terms of what used to be in the 70s, in terms of the type of social entitlements that were won at the time. Heavily cut in the welfare state, and maximum flexibilization of the labor power, that is making precarious life at work. This is in all major Western industrialized country. At the same time, the high increase of interest rate have brought to its knees many countries in the south, the same countries that in the previous phase, in the post-war period, they fought for independence and involved in anti-colonial struggles, that is, trying to gain sovereignties in their own destiny. At this moment, now with this massive crisis, we're completely tied to do the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, and global capital, that force on them a series of structural adjustments, structural adjustment policies that has, again, they meant, in fact, heavy cuts into their own form of welfare state, which in many parts of the world meant cutting in food subsidies for the poor and many other, and forcing them to implement free trade policies, financial liberalization, trade liberalizations, and so on. This north and south, but there is another thing, that while at the same time that the north was in deindustrializing, the south, or area of the south, China, East Asia, first is Asia, East Asia, then China came very prominently, South Korea, Singapore, South Korea, Indonesia, Malaysia, and a large area of Southern Asia and some of the countries in Latin America were started to industrialize heavily, And what does that mean? What was the effect of that? And again, if you think about from the point of view of reproduction, what did it mean? It meant that for the countries of the north, the workers of the north, the working families of the north, could sustain a standard of living, okay, that were not that much worse off in relation to their own wage cut, because the value, the prices of a lot of goods now imported were much cheaper. Okay, so in spite of cutting wages to the workers of the north, their standard of living did not go down very much. Okay, now what does that has got to do with anything? Well, in terms of reproduction of labor power, reproduction of conditions of reproductions, what we have in here is how a mechanism of dividing the global commoners in a very material and simple way. You have forced massive people out of the countryside, out of their commons, through a massive wave of enclosures, okay, out of their commons, to enter these sweatshops. And we all have read about sweatshops, 12 hours, miserable wages, terrible conditions of work and living, okay? And that allowed to, or enter into the appeasement of the workers in the north, which incidentally were also given another part of the deal. And the other part was access to betterment, in quote, betterment via cheap credit and debt. Now, a huge amount of council houses could have been sold and privatized by Margaret Thatcher's and sold to working people initially to in London, in Britain, okay? That meant debt. But everything, debt escalated for anything, including consumption, not only housing. And the last wave of foreclosures and foreclosure crisis, the subprime crisis of 2008, is just the last of a series of financial crises that was part of this dynamic of trying to better one's conditions of life in a condition in which social security were falling and wages were falling, and therefore tie your own reproduction to the destiny of a financial market. In the countries in the south, the deal was get out of the poor conditions of the countryside left abandoned or hit by wave of dispossession, and find some comfort and some income in the factories in the new industrial era. Now, in all this period, though, okay, there has been at the same time massive wave of struggles. I remember in the 80s when in Italy we were under the pressure of cut and unemployment and deindustrialization, that we thought that the world was sitting still, that no struggles were happening. But in fact, all around the world, we learn a decade later, all around the world there were massive struggles against structural adjustment policies. For example, struggles that became very prominent in the 90s. There were amazing movements that changed completely the side of politics, in my opinion, of the way of doing politics, which was in 1995. Some strange indigenous people came out in the mid-90s from the forest, Lacandonian forest jungle of Chiapas, southeast Mexico, and they were the Zapatistas. And they were the very first visible indigenous movement that allowed really to start to think about the importance of the commons for social movement. Because these were a bunch of people that only were fighting, okay, fighting the Mexican state, fighting the wave of enclosures in La Condonia jungle, right? But also administering their own areas, also dealing with the internal fights in the community and giving space to the internal fight of the communities, women's struggles inside the communities, okay? And these were fundamental for us when they appear, because ever since we actually treated politics as something that different gangs could have. Different sectarian groups have their own lines, and one of these lines maybe was the correct one. Well, instead, the Zapatistas organized in 1996 an encuentro, a meeting inside the jungle, where about 4,000 people from around the world arrived, and they were hosted by these poor communities, 4,000 people hosted by these communities, into cabanas built in wood by the entire community. We were given food by the entire community. We were put in conference centers made again in pole of wood and some leaves as a roof. And the only thing, this was the first revolutionary movement doing so, the only thing that they wanted from us is that we started to talk one another and start to problematize how do we change the world, okay? And it really struck me the fact that they were wearing their balaclava. Each panel had two Zapatistas representatives in their own balaclava, not saying a word. The only thing they asked us is at the end of the entire procedures, they would we would write a document, try to, what would it mean to change the world? What were the problems, and in trying to absorb all the diversities and the complexity of the situations. Now, I remember those nights where you had different groups. We had trade unionists, we had Trotskyists, your Maists, your feminists, your socialists, your environmentalists, you all kind of mixed bags of people getting in that room and having to overcome all those ideological baggage that we brought with us from the 70s, okay, and 80s, okay, and that was fantastic. But what they actually told us there is to do some commoning, some producing in common of thoughts in that particular case, while we witnessed at their own commoning in dealing and creating and sustaining these incredible communities. The Zapatistas were communities that were able to couple together this struggle with the commoning. And I think that is inspiration for us again. I'll talk about this a bit later on. Now, as I said, the struggles, the neoliberal period, which now has reached an impasse, and we'll talk about this a bit later, follow the Keynesian period. Now, the Keynesian period, neoliberalism I mentioned, is the result of a crisis of the 70s. The crisis of the 70s itself was brought by that series of struggles, different subjects, more or less, not completely. Anti-colonial struggles from the 60s, women movement, massive women movement, who have taught us, however was the end of the women movement in the West in terms of, it seems that it has reduced into a kind of demand for labor market participations, but at the time was a struggle inside the commons, the households commons. At the time, the 1970s, women movement was posing the question of, or large sections of the movement was posing the question of wage for housework. Not for housewives, but for housework, because the deal, the Keynesian deal, was pretty much based on having stable sites for the reproduction of the labor power, households, in which more or less women, whether they were on the wage or not, did the housework. Now, the women movement has taught us how inside the commons, in this particular case, the community and the households, the family, okay, you also have struggles, okay? You also have struggles that leads to the transformations of the commons. And in my opinion, has taught us to not to romanticize commons, however our models want us to think about it, okay? Again, a series of other struggles have brought at the end Keynesianism that led to neoliberalism. And the Keynesianism itself has been generated by this other wave of struggles, which in fact a long wave, a long cycle of struggle that shook the world enormously at the time, from at least 1917, that is the year of the Soviet Revolution, that, however, one wants to think about the old Soviet Union in the imagery of the people around the world, of the commoners around the world. It was an amazing symbolic thing, okay, an amazing power. The power, in fact, that the working people in the most autocratic czarist place could actually take government. And in fact, the Soviet, the councils, or, you know, the heart of the factory commons, okay, could actually be said to govern. Okay, we know that that was not really the case in the end or in the middle, but that was what was flaming us people. There is an alternative. Okay, and so a series of revolutionary movements around, and even the simple threat that something that is could happen in any other country scared the shit out of all the ruling elites. Okay, and so when in the 1930s, for example, after the big depression was triggered in 1929 with the crash of the stock market then. In the 1930s, if you, for example, if you study the history of the United States, you find out a lot, incredible commons emerging from the bottom up. Commons which are not commons heterogeneous ethnically or speaking, but commons that were the heart of what will be then the labor unions, the commons of the labor movement, the unrepresented labor movement, the migrants from Ireland, from Italy, from Germany, working in factories like Ford, General Motors, and all around, or working seasonal work, migrant job, precarious work, has those told us by people like John Steinbeck in his amazing books, who actually brought together, overcome barriers and overcome divisions that the bosses used all the time to keep them apart, to make them to compete one another. And in fact, they did their own commons. When their own commons, mutual aid, solidarity, decisions governing their own actions, their own reproduction, and at the same time, a battle. A battle that then after the war. It took a war to really shake the ruling elite and change their way of thinking and start to co-opt those demands. And first thing, co-opted the unions. The unions, if you just check the union contract before the war in the United States in General Motors was one page. One page. It says, we won't work more than that, and you don't pay less than that. Something like this, okay? Everything that didn't work, whatever unpleased the workers' commons inside the factories, okay, because that was the dominant way to work, they would stop production and they start complaining. Until another one page was written and work could carry on. Well, that workers' commons was highly effective. Then what happened was that Roosevelt took the unions to the table before the war, forced some of the employers to recognize unions, including Ford, who bitterly was against the unions, and turned the unions to mega bureaucratic structures. The first thing they made them to sign is the no-strike pledge for patriotic reasons, for the illusionary commons of the nations, because we also this other thing to deal with, the illusionary commons. What is the nation? Okay, I mean that's an illusionary commons because it has illusionary communities, like a football club. Well, like a football team. I'm a fan of Inter, or yes, that's our common, no. Well, that's the so no strike pledge in the middle of the war, which meant at the same time that the bosses were reaping a huge amount of profit, while the workers had to stay on the no strike pledge, which meant what? It meant a lot of wildcat strikes went on the factories as well. After the war, implementation of the welfare state in a variety of ways in different countries. So a certain level of social security, a pledge of full employment, because it was recognized this was the main form for social reproduction, okay, having an income, with allowed income, but also a quite active policies family policies to keep women out in one way or in another. So configuring a particular divisions between the waged and the unwaged, between who has power and who has not power. A strike in the post-war period, just to give you an example of what does I mean bureaucratization, meant that if you were working and I don't know, your window was broken and you were cold, while before the war you simply say, hey, what the hell is that window? Stop working, wildcat strike. Okay, until the window was repaired. So an amazing powers from the below. In time of after the war, you'd have to go through proper procedures. You'd have to ask your steward, who then will ask the foreman, who then asks the foreman while production was going on. The measure of capital. Capital would have been able to co-opt the labor common in this particular context, in these particular conditions. So all I'm saying is here is first, there is an amazing relation between struggles and changes in capitalist strategies. Okay, there is periods in which capital reaches an impasse, hit by both his own systemic laws and difficulties, and by this external, which at the same time is internal agency that is struggles from everywhere, okay? Variety of struggles. And so until it can sustain, it continues. It modifies a little bit policies here and there, reconfigure here and there, but it reaches a point in which, okay, it reaches a situation of a crisis of social relations. Reproduction, on one hand, is in critical state, for example, 1930s, and the struggles are so high that he actually has to change direction. But this change in direction, though, and this is the point, from our perspective, from the perspective of commoners who think about systems of self-governance, okay, is not a step in the right direction, even if we win concessions. It's not a step in the right direction, because that step can be taken away anytime, or even worse, because that positive step, that concession, that particular right, may come at the cost of another commoner somewhere else around the world. And we really have to consider ourselves as a, you know, as a global commoner's body here, because that is what capital does, is dividing one against the other one. So, let's see at the moment what are the possibilities to break this impasse. For capital, it is an impasse of growth, of accumulation, okay? Often, growth and accumulation, as someone mentioned before, development, is linked and compatible to the commons, to the reproduction of commons. Why? Because if people have jobs, gets money, and they put in wherever commons they participate, whether it is micro commons in the family, or they get involved in local communities work, or they build more extensive networks. Access to wage is, all conditions constant, an important part of the equations, because the commons developed in an environment which is a capitalist environment, and we always have to consider this. And the capitalist environment is an environment in which a social force, which is capital, only has one thing in mind: to grow and accumulate. It's part of its own internal laws. Okay, this is the way it works. The ways it constructs itself. Okay, so the first plan, which is available to the ruling elite to bypass, to overcome, sorry, not bypass, but to overcome this impasse, is Plan A, Neoliberalism Plus. Neoliberalism Plus, which is in fact what's gone on since 2008, since the crisis. Incidentally, this Neoliberalism Plus is also dotted with elements which are not really neoliberals. For example, the saving of the banks too big to fail were classic Keynesian policy in a sense. Or the micro-fiscal stimulus in relation to what was done back in the Keynesian era, the micro-fiscal stimulus that was implemented by Obama was also a Keynesian strategy. Or even at the origin of neoliberalism, Ronald Reagan fiscal stimulus in military spending was in a sense a Keynesian element within a global strategies of neoliberalism. Neoliberalism Plus would be first the fine-tuning of neoliberalism. For example, some banking regulations, as they are happening or attempted here and there. Banking regulations that, yes, one may say, oh yeah, good, you know, make them, regulate them, but still that will not reduce our dependence on the banking system, on the financial system, and on debt, because neoliberalism plus would be also an increase in debt. Think about what is happening now in the UK. In the UK, the conservative government, which at the same time is thinking about kind of micro banking regulations, at the same time tripling the fees for education. Okay, this is a country where up to 10 years ago, you still, whenever you went to education, higher educations, you were still not only not paying anything for going to university, but you were in fact given a bursary. Okay, the Labour government introduced the first fees, shocking everybody, which was around 1,000 plus, shocking everybody, and slowly but surely fees were increased until the new conservative government, in alliance with the liberal Democrats, who before the election signed publicly with the student unions a pledge not to increase fees, and they had in their own manifesto that pledge, and their own official line was for free education. Okay, well, in coalition with the conservative, that tripled the fees, and now 9,000. So student debt as well is escalating in the United States, as is very large in the United States. And movement like this is happening throughout Europe. In Italy, this is the push that you can see, you can perceive in the discourse as it is. So financialization and increase in debt, it's escalating. Okay, the dependence on debt. And of course, the full-scale new enclosures in whatever corner of the world is part of the neoliberal agenda. I have to say, though, that at the same time, the crisis of reproduction we're talking about is also worrying them a lot. The Conservative Party in the UK is also the one who proposes the big society. And the big society is, in fact, and this is literally what we keep referring to, is the fact that community takes things in their own hands, that in fact compensates for the social services that are cut by the government. So there are these contradictions, and you never know how to play. And yes, there are some opening. I'm talking to people who actually use the new eyes. I mean, for example, schools, cooperative schools are very much promoted in the UK, and then I've got a few friends, in fact, that are trying to set up a school run by the parents and the teachers together, using this particular favors and opening that the government makes. But you don't know where it goes. It's a difficult thing. So, but, you know, more or less, neoliberalism is increasing the dependence of people on money, okay? It's the increasing precarizations of life. Of course, Plan A, at the same time, and here I have to say the commons are so late in catching up in terms of, because, you know, if the crisis continues, the needs of social reproduction are massive. And imagine if Plan A2 is implemented. What shall we do? Plan A1 is this kind of creepy neoliberalism trying to survive, add a patch here, add a patch there, but still in the same mind, you know, liberalizations, financialization. If Plan A2, as several are talking about, you know, the rival of Obama, Romney, if was elected there, he could have been an exponent of Plan A2, but there are other people especially in the financial world, who advocate it, and not only. Plan A2, the same substance of Plan A1, neoliberalism, but to be a different thing. Instead of forecasting a recession of 10, 15, 20, 25, 30 years for some commentators, okay, so this kind of steady state in which people will struggle daily on survival, plan it too, say, well, no, let's do it quickly. Let's do it quickly. Let the big banks fail. Incidentally, it demands also from the movement, and quite rightly so, okay? Let the big banks fail. When a system of social security is completely linked to the financial system, letting the big bank fail, then using the rhetoric of making them pay for their mistake, well, this would actually adjust prices straight away. Banks would fail, companies would fail, pensions would fail, and a variety of other linkages. And when that happened, the conditions for a further devalorization of labor power would be introduced, because there would be such a massive, deep hole that it would be created the conditions for a recovery, because profit opportunity and profitability will be increased. When costs are falling, profitability increases. If there is a massive and sudden devaluation of labor power, okay, the profit and capital, the profitability opportunity increase. This is A2. The other possibility, of course, is, as many advocate, Plan B, Keynesianism plus, a new Keynesian era. Like the old Keynesian, more interventions by the state, okay, more bureaucratization, fiscal policies address growth. Now one may say, well, that could be good. You know, you have a state investment in, for example, green technologies. Yes, you could. There is a big thing to talk about here, whether green technologies in itself, that is technology in itself, are a good thing for the environment, for example. It depends. You know, there is here a long question of the question of efficiency, energy efficiency. If you're talking about green technology and green industries, you're talking about especially making industry more energy efficient, or everything, in fact, even households, energy efficient. For example, changing light bulbs or changing the engines, making more for a gallon, more miles for a gallon, or more light for a given expenditure of energies. The question is that in an optic of expansion of capital, if the individual technological efficiency of a light bulb or machine or of an engine increases, if at the same time we are seeking an expansion of the same form of life, okay, you can be efficient as much as you want on the single ratio, mile per hour, or etc. But if you have multiplied by 1 million more the instances in which you use light bulbs, or the instances in which you use cars, or build roads, or build factories, then there is still a problem. Okay, imagine just a light bulb, just as, you know, quick example. You have your own light bulbs, and there's a new light bulbs, energy efficiency, consume less per hours. At the same time, in the world, they're building millions of shopping malls in which you have a billion, a zillion of light bulbs showing newly produced commodities. I mean, the new efficiently built light bulb doesn't serve. Okay, so there is an issue in energy, in green technology, as tied to capital accumulation. Okay, not green technology per se, but as tied to capitalist accumulation, which is important. The other thing is Keynesianism can take any form. Could have the form of military Keynesianism. You know, Keynes itself believed in his 1936 work that formed the new direction in economics and economic policies in the post-war era. Keynes believed that as long as you give money to people, the government give money to people in some way, even hire them to dig holes and then cover them again, that you have helped the economy to increase, okay? And there is a reason for that. The question of Keynesianism, though, and what is difficult today to repropose such a thing is different. It's not just the will. It's a question that you need first strong mechanism and institutions of representations, deals with various sections of the commoners. Deals. You need in the post-war period. You had these big bureaucratic institutions you could have a deal with, and once you have a deal with them, then they, as representatives of the working class, could go on the shop floor and, for example, and tell them to shut up if there was an issue, because there were proper procedure that you had a deal. Okay, the type of direct democracies and people participation that we envisage are not part of Keynesianism. It cannot be part of Keynesianism. Okay, capital controls in another one. A heavy capital control in order to have any type of expansionary policies within one country. You need to have capital control. You also need to have trade control. Imagine you are a country in the European Union who suddenly introduces a expansionary policy. Okay, you introduce expansionary policies, and in order to promote production, and at the same time, your expansion has in fact favored the people who actually export to your own country, because maybe they're cheaper, because maybe they're better. So you haven't increased your employment, okay? Even from the perspective of pure economics in today's world, looking at Keynesianism, we will look at the closing up of the world. And I don't think we want to close up the world. We want to increase the sovereignty and the localizations of many activities, yes, okay, and empowerment of communities around, but you want to close up the world, okay, which something like this would entail. There is then another nasty plan, possibility, and Athens and Greece is a reminder that in conditions of impasse, we might have competitors as people who seek a way to expand the commons, which is Plan E and F, exclusion and fascism. Let's not forget that fascism was an ideology and a practice that was in fact very much based on the commons, on a strong sense of a community, of commoning, of getting together the people, the pooling resources and energies and do something for the country. Maybe it's much different from what we actually seek, and with the type of commons that we see as positive examples in the world, because we tend to see opening commons, commons that cross-contaminates with the others, that are based on horizontal democratic processes. But just leave it there as a specter hanging on us and as a possibility. Then there is Plan C and D. bottom-up, emergent strategies of livelihood reproductions. Emergent strategies of livelihood reproduction. We'll see a few examples later, but I'm emphasizing livelihood reproduction because this is the conditions of the crisis and is the conditions for growing power vis-à-vis capital. The conditions for which we can delink, uncouple from capital's dependence on capital circuits. And at the same time, growing our power vis-à-vis capital, even in bargaining process, in struggles for wage. The question is, how do we link the wage to the commons? And I'm saying this because we tend generally to think about the commons as just that system. I tend to see it, as I said, in this environment which is made of capital. Now, I understand commons. In Italy, there is these words that, in my opinion, doesn't really express what commons are. In Italy, there is much the use of the word beni comuni, common goods. But the common goods are just one of the elements of the commons. That is, the shared, pooled resources are just one of the elements of the common. Common goods are just that things. Okay, pooled together stuff are just that things. The other element of the commons, of course, is a community. And the two things come alive, becomes or reproduce itself and sustain themselves through the activities of commoning. This activity that Peter Linebaugh, the great historian of the commons, Peter Linebaugh, and struggles, Peter Linebaugh has brought to us these new terms. It was not inexistent in a contemporary English vocabulary, but that apparently was very much used in the times where you write about, from the birth of the Magna Carta in the 13th centuries onward, as a constituent practice of the commons, of the life giver of the commons. Pool resources, community of producers. Before my talk, I attended to this seminar before when a picture was shown of these whitened up houses in Zagreb, the empty properties in Zagreb. And someone said, well, this is a common resource. And of course, we claim that this is a common resource. But this common resource, for others, is not a common resource. For others, it's a private resource. If you actually broaden up, you see, well, for us it's a common resource. For them, is not a common resource. For them, it's just staying there. It becomes a private resource. It's a means for enrichment through speculation, most likely. Okay? So there is here a clashing perspective. And we have to, indeed, put this clash at the center of our understanding. In fact, of what creates commons, what of these resources we encounter in our walk in the city is a common. Those white houses there that lay empty where, in fact, millions of people are in need, become commons in the very moment a community claims those resources as commons. And in that very moment becomes the problematization of how, what is the type of social movement, social connections, creation of effective powers in order to claim those resources and to start this, to use an old word, dialectic between the communities and the resources through commoning. Okay? How do we reclaim them? Not just in thought, but in practice, and how we turn those pool resources, we pool these resources and build our communities through the commoning. The commons then are rooted in struggles because we live in a society which is not only has capital outside the commons and always attempt to not just to enclose the commons but to divide the common, to co-opt the common, to use it in a moment of crisis, as also has been mentioned in the previous panel. So there is a struggle there which we have to problematize when we do problematize the commons, but there is also the divisions within the communities of commoners, divisions of perspective, divisions of in terms of income and wealth, divisions in many senses. That divisions that can be overcome through commonings and through struggles in those commonings. Of course, a different type of struggles than the one you have against capital, but struggles nevertheless is the dance of life that bring people to develop a shared sense, a shared values together. Now, I would like to I haven't kept track of my time, actually. Okay, right. Okay. I would like to talk about a few experiences of commons. Experiences, see, the picture is not very nice. Experiences that are located all in the sphere of reproductions. Some experiences are very frontline, meaning struggle with capital, and others are not frontline, but they still have a fundamental role to play. This is the emergency services that exist near where I live. I live in the mountains in Italy, in the Apennines, and thanks to cutting the state services, and state ambulances and health services, the entire mountain regions will take about 45 minutes to reach with an ambulance to get anybody from us. And we're not that far from, we're only half an hour from the hospitals, but that's the way it works. Thanks to these ambulance services, we have, in 10 minutes, an ambulance reach you anywhere. The entire service throughout the Apennines, not just in my regions, is made by volunteers that pool resources. The ambulances belong to the communities, which are not just the communities of volunteers, which are drawn directly from the community, the larger communities, and many people I know who run the ambulance. Okay, but there is a kind of organic relation between the ambulance people, the people who run the service, and the community. There is fundraising, there is ongoing lines about what's the problem with the services and all these things. Now, recently, some idiot from the region decided that this type of services had to be curtailed by being regulated, strict regulation, meaning in this particular case, nobody knows why, they had to go inside, they have to wait the call for the service inside their office, the office of the association. Rather than, as they do now, everybody stay in their own houses, one of them has the ambulance, and depending on where they call, either the cars goes to the ambulance, the cars of the other members of the ambulance, or the ambulance goes to them. Okay, in this way you actually save a lot of time. Okay, So these are kind of an ongoing frictions that goes with the state, okay? We don't know why it's done it, but it's just an example. And of course, community gardens. There is a massive growth in community gardens everywhere, but they're so small, you know, especially in urban areas. If you compare it with the Movimento Sem Terra in Brazil, there were millions of people actually squat, occupy massive land, build their unused land, build their own infrastructures, build their own schools, build their own hospitals, and dig the land like the old diggers in the birth, much a few hundred years before the revolution, the industrial revolution. There are millions of examples like this around, but in the question of food sovereignty is such a massive example. Now, one of the things that mobilized, though, most of the gardeners, though, is local food, good food, and all this stuff, rather than a political discourse of food sovereignty, you know, which would be directly challenging, I suppose, the broader issues of globalization of the food industry, and have Times Bank local money, again, another tool that we all know about. Again, but is very little part, for example, of many social movements. Social movements don't seem to link up with this kind of stuff. But you need Time Bank, and in fact, you need to expand existing, again, very micro examples of implementation of these things. We would need to build and expand on this, and the question is, how do we do it? How do we link it to social movements? How do we allow the use of such tools that would allow, in fact, the building of alternative networks of solidarity economy, as it was said. Examples of urban reclaiming of parks, like in Exante, in Athens, where the entire communities has reclaimed the parking lot to make it a park. The entire community visited this place. It's quite amazing. But now they have a problem of management, and a problem of management in the sense, not that the people don't manage. The question is that this is an open park, and you got a lot of local kids, actually not even local kids, coming in, stay up to 3 o'clock in the morning, getting the local upset because of the noise up to, and they trashed the place, and they never, although invited, participated in the assembly. Questions like these are questions of very relevant questions about, you know, how to expand the involvement of the community. You got the community much involved in the management of this, but then how do you open up to other sections of the populations? How do you deal with? These are very complex issues that the people there don't know how to deal with. They haven't, you know, they try to invite the kids to participate, but there is simply refusal to manage. And in fact, they were accusing the managers, the people, not the managers, the people actually managing the park to be the police, because they were questioning the issue of trashing the place. Potato Park in Peru, example, on the other side of the world, amazing example of 6 communities who have spent the last dozens of years in war with one another, going together, and in fact repatriating all the type of potatoes that come from Peru, which are about 1600 type of potatoes on the top of the Andes near Cusco. And another example of locally specific of reproduction, okay, livelihood reproduction and commoning, and overcoming at the same time the threat of enclosures of their own land, because they managed to network with the university, with a series of NGOs, in a variety of ways. But the most incredible example is that they found around, also for their own political implications that they had at the time, is the Water Association in Cochabamba. The Water Association in Cochabamba, you heard about the water war in 2001, when the government wanted to sell off water, Bolivian water, to multinational corporations who wanted to charge even rainwater for the local. And we all heard about the water war, the fact that these indigenous people came down from the mountains together with the urban residents and put up a fight of 4 or 5 months, which in fact involved almost everybody in the cities and forced the government to make a U-turn. Well, from here, when we were reading stories, we thought, well, this is a massive movement, great, but actually was far more of a massive movement. In my opinion, this is the kind of exemplary movement we want to look for in terms of, having an effect. The effect of this was even changing the government and changing the constitution and changing the president, which now has got some other troubles. But, at that point, what we had there was not simply a social movement. We didn't have civil society. We used civil society much before. Well, we have to go beyond civil society. We don't want to talk about civil society. We do want to talk in a sense, but we want to go beyond that notion of civil society, of more or less isolated people around who are concerned citizens. These were people who were, in fact, representative of their own communities and their own commons. These were the people in the previous 30 years have built water infrastructures, dig wells, lay down pipes, and build up amazing water associations because neither the state nor the market could give them water. So they simply did it for themselves. And when the multinational corporation came and said, hey, now I put a meter on your well, your community well, these people got a bit pissed off. It's not just simply say water is private now, like a principle. No, it's like saying, now you pay for the work that I have to pay for the work I've done. No, at the same time, that's absolutely crazy. It brought down an entire populations and was able to actually involve many others. Still now, water association run water in half of Cochabamba, 250 people. I mean, Cochabamba is 500,000. Half of Cochabamba, the south of Cochabamba, is not served by public water, and private water is extremely expensive. And I will have many examples, but I don't want to use them all. I have to mention this Salinas. You know about Salinas? This is Ecuador. This is a village of a few thousand people, about 3,500 meters high in Ecuador, where 95% of the population is in cooperative, and the other 5% is in the not in the cooperative, still take advantage of that other 95%. Okay, they have cooperative for anything. Okay, they're all employed one way or another, and this happens for the last 30 years since this amazing priest Antonio Polo set up a credit unions in the 1970s to take away the local from the dependence of the only owners of mines and employment around. The guy now was bought off and by the locals, and an entire cooperative movement flourished in 30 years. Now, the interesting thing about this stuff as well is not only have their own cooperative, they're linked to the market in that, but also they have all a kind of a system of livelihood reproduction. They have mingas. Mingas is a thing used by the Andes for hundreds of years of bringing together people to do work for the entire population. I would really stop here, many other examples, but I want to do more. I would just say there is only, I think, two major obstacles to plan C and D. One is so-called objective, which is capital, is outside the common. Outside the commons, it is a force we have to reckon on. Don't think that we can develop the commons without dealing with capital, its power to tie its own expansion to people's needs for their own reproduction, okay? And then subjective, the fact that in fact people might prefer capital to reproduce themselves rather than the commons. The commons have to give payoff, not the same type of payoff, of course. The commons promise a convivial life and a convivial communities which capital cannot deliver, among other things. The subjective obstacles are essentially summarized by one need. We need to explode the middle class. And by middle class, I mean, I'm part as well, and we all part of it. The middle class, by middle class here, I don't mean by a particular level of income, but about subjective conditions, a condition which sees betterment, and we are all legitimate. It is legitimate to seek betterment in one's own conditions of life, but betterments within the conditions of the social order. And that is an idea, rather than an idea, is something inside us from many people around the who aspire to a middle-class life, which in a planet that cannot sustain middle-class life. And in any case, even if it was delivering to some, it was still not delivered to others, therefore recreating divisions. So how do we break that false dream of middle-classness, isolated individuals and micro-commons isolated from one another, which constitute the middle class? It's a big question that we all have to face. Thank you.
So 10 minutes for questions. Oh, there's okay.
Right. Can you hear me if I stay sitting down? Because I have a problem with standing up. I think there is a danger in all discussions about the commons of somehow imagining that activities that are outside capitalist market relations are somehow outside also, that are not characteristics by other social power relations. And I think it's very important to be aware always that whether we're talking about tribal societies or the family or any other spheres of activity that are currently outside capitalist market relations, that somehow no exploitation goes on within them, there are no power relations within them, there's no appropriation of property, of sexuality, of other people's labor time going on within those communities. And that can lead to a kind of romanticization which can in some circumstances be very dangerous, because any social group that defines itself in some way always defines the process of inclusion is also a process of exclusion. So the self-organization of citizens in small towns in America, for instance, gave us the lynch mob. you know, it might give very admirable forms of, you know, collective agriculture or voluntary fire brigades or something like that, because it can also give very socially dangerous things. And you know, we all, with history of Europe in the 20th century, showed us how fascist parties can very successfully appeal to ideas of Heimat, you know, connection with the land, of, you know, small idealized groups of rural citizens in some kind of idealized commons. And we live in a world where there have been huge displacements of people, millions and millions of people across the globe, displaced either by wars or by economic factors or by ethnic cleansing or whatever. And what happens to those people in these constructions of insiders and outsiders? And it seems to me that any debate about the commons has to take into account the way that your plans C and D can easily flip over into the plans E and F that you also discussed. And I'd like to know what your views about that are. Thank you.
I completely agree with you. I mentioned this by saying that the capital rules also through its divisions, and these divisions is divisions inside the commons itself. The division is, in the first place, a division between the waged and the unwaged, for example. Divisions inside the commons, so who does what, who rules in the commons. I completely agree with you. This is absolutely something that, that's why I emphasize the fact that struggle is not just struggle vis-a-vis capital. Struggle is also inside the commons, and it happens all the time. So I completely agree with you.
So if there are no further questions this evening, so we might conclude for the evening. Massimo, thank you. Once again, please, a round of applause for Massimo. And before I say something about tomorrow's day, also I'd like to thank again to Goethe Institute and to the nice staff of the institution. So a round of applause for them. Tomorrow we are at Mama, we are not here. And the program tomorrow starts at 11 and it continues down pretty much the same line, discussing the commons and social movements tomorrow at 11 at Mama. And then we verge off into a discussion of forms of production in digital networks and sustainability of those forms of production. That's at 1. And then in the afternoon, we have a discussion on the current state of the economic crisis in Eurozone, in Europe, and in the region. And finally, to conclude the day, we'll have a talk by an Italian legal scholar, Ugo Mattei, who is trying to conceive a different framework for understanding commons vis-a-vis the state and the market, and vis-a-vis the Western legal tradition, particularly looking critically at the practices of plunder, and he will colonial plunder, and he will then try to look how this maps out on efforts of the last year to recuperate water system through a public referendum in Italy. However, Ugo contained a stomach flu, so he won't be here in person, but will be calling in through Skype, but there will be a talk in the evening. So you are kindly invited tomorrow to come to Mama, and yeah, have a nice evening.